Judge Caroline Bennett began her day in court, surrounded by the familiar hum of activity, the shuffle of papers, murmurs of spectators, and the occasional sound of a distant gavel. It seemed like an ordinary case, another routine day in her long career. As the bailiff called the next case, the state of Louisiana versus Michael Carter, Caroline sat upright, her gaze calm and professional. The charges read aloud were serious: assault, robbery, and resisting arrest. She prepared herself to approach the case with the impartiality she prided herself on. However, when the defendant was escorted into the courtroom, her composure faltered. Standing before her, shackled at the wrists and ankles, was Michael Carter, not just another defendant, but someone she had known deeply in another life. Michael was her childhood friend, the boy she had grown up with in a small town on the outskirts of Baton Rouge. For a moment, time seemed to stop as Caroline's mind flooded with memories of their shared youth, racing bikes through dusty streets, late-night talks under the stars, and the unspoken promise to always have each other's backs. Now, fate had brought them together under the most unexpected and heartbreaking circumstances. Memories overwhelmed Caroline Bennett as she sat on the bench, staring at the man she once knew as her closest friend, Michael Carter. They had grown up together in a small town near Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a place where racial divides dictated nearly every aspect of life. Caroline came from a modest but stable family, living in a neat house with a white picket fence. Michael, on the other hand, lived at the edge of town in a weathered house surrounded by fields, a life marked by hardship. Yet, in their shared childhood, none of that seemed to matter. Their friendship had started by chance, a serendipitous meeting by the creek where Caroline had wandered too far from her backyard. Michael was fishing, his line tangled, and she had offered to help. That moment sparked years of adventures, secret bike rides down dusty roads, late-night conversations under the stars, and shared dreams of escaping the constraints of their small-town lives. Michael had always been the dreamer. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he had asked one night as they lay on the grass beneath a blanket of stars. "Really getting out? Going somewhere people don't look at us funny just for sitting together?" Caroline had laughed at the time, brushing off the idea. But Michael wasn't joking. Even as a child, he understood the world's injustices and wanted more than their segregated town could offer. But their bond, as strong as it was, couldn't withstand the weight of societal pressures. Caroline's father had been the one to end it. One summer evening, he found them sitting together on the porch, talking like they always did. His disapproval was swift and severe. Caroline, get inside, now. She hesitated, glancing at Michael, who remained frozen in place. His quiet voice broke the silence, tinged with resignation. "Go on." But they never saw each other again. Her father forbade her from going near Michael, and shortly afterward, his family moved away. Caroline threw herself into her studies, excelling in school and eventually pursuing a career in law. But even as her ambitions took her far from their small town, she never forgot Michael, the boy who had taught her about courage and resilience. Now, years later, seeing him as a defendant in her courtroom, she was forced to confront the painful reality of what had become of him after their lives diverged. As Judge Caroline Bennett reviewed the details of Michael Carter's life since they last saw each other, a wave of emotions overtook her. His record revealed a series of minor offenses: petty theft, loitering, and other small infractions. None of it pointed to the violent man the prosecution was trying to portray, but it painted a picture of someone caught in a cycle of hardship and survival. Caroline felt a pang of guilt and sadness, wondering what had led him down this path. Had their broken friendship been one of the many turning points that shaped his struggles? Sitting on the bench, Caroline tried to steady herself. Her role demanded impartiality, yet every detail of the trial felt personal. The prosecutor built their case on circumstantial evidence, a store clerk's testimony and a grainy surveillance video purportedly showing Michael committing the robbery. But the footage was far from clear, making it difficult to confirm the suspect's identity. Caroline's professional instincts wrestled with her personal memories. She had built a career on fairness and objectivity, But how could she ignore the boy she once knew, the boy who had been kind, honest, and full of dreams? As the prosecutor outlined their case with clinical detachment, Caroline's eyes drifted to Michael. Shackled and slouched, she looked like a shadow of his former self, but in his expression, she saw hints of the same determination she remembered. The defense, led by a young attorney named Lisa Porter, argued passionately for Michael's innocence. Lisa questioned the credibility of the evidence, noting its inconsistencies and gaps. Caroline found herself silently rooting for the defense, though she knew she couldn't let her feelings influence her judgment. The trial had only begun, but it was already testing her resolve like nothing else before. As the trial progressed, critical pieces of evidence were brought forward, casting doubt on Michael Carter's guilt. Central to the prosecution's case was a grainy surveillance video from the convenience store. The footage, poorly lit and unclear, showed a figure in a red hoodie entering the store and lunging over the counter. The prosecution insisted the person in the video was Michael, but the defense argued otherwise. The figure's face was obscured, and the video quality made it impossible to identify distinguishing features with certainty. Michael's alibi further complicated the case. He claimed he had been walking home from a friend's house at the time of the robbery. However, the friend, fearing community backlash, refused to testify. Defense attorney Lisa Porter argued that the absence of a corroborating witness did not invalidate Michael's alibi. To bolster their case, the defense introduced a forensic expert who reviewed the surveillance footage. The expert testified that based on the figure's height and build, it was inconclusive whether the person in the video was Michael. Furthermore, the expert revealed discrepancies in the video's timestamp, raising questions about its reliability. This revelation sent ripples through the courtroom, as it suggested that the evidence might have been mishandled or tampered with. Lisa pressed on, challenging the thoroughness of the investigation. The arresting officer admitted that no red hoodie, a key piece of evidence, had been recovered, and that no search was conducted to locate it. This omission highlighted a lack of due diligence, casting further doubt on the prosecution's case. As these cracks in the evidence emerged, Caroline watched intently. The jury exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from certainty to doubt. Though she remained outwardly composed, Caroline felt the weight of the moment. The evidence was meant to illuminate the truth, yet here it seemed to deepen the uncertainty surrounding Michael's guilt. The trial took a pivotal turn as the defense began to scrutinize the evidence that the prosecution claimed tied Michael Carter to the crime. The case relied heavily on a surveillance video from the convenience store, which allegedly captured the robbery. However, as the footage played in the courtroom, its limitations became immediately apparent. The video was grainy and poorly lit, making it impossible to clearly identify the individual in the red hoodie. The figure in the footage moved quickly, lunging over the counter before disappearing off screen. The prosecution asserted with confidence that the person in the video was Michael, but the lack of clarity left significant room for doubt. Adding to the uncertainty was Michael's alibi. He maintained that he had been walking home from a friend's house at the time of the robbery. However, his friend refused to testify, citing fear of retaliation from the community. Despite this, defense attorney Lisa Porter argued passionately that the absence of a witness willing to testify did not undermine Michael's claim. Instead, she urged the jury to focus on the inconsistencies in the evidence presented by the prosecution. The defense's most powerful move came when Lisa introduced a forensic video analyst as an expert witness. The analyst explained that based on their review of the footage, it was impossible to definitively identify Michael as the person in the video. The figure's height and build were inconclusive, and the poor quality of the video further muddied any attempt at a clear identification. More alarmingly, the analyst revealed that the video's timestamp had been altered, raising serious questions about its integrity and reliability. This revelation cast a shadow over the prosecution's case, suggesting that the evidence might not only be flawed, but potentially mishandled or tampered with. Lisa also highlighted significant lapses in the investigation. During cross-examination, the arresting officer admitted that no red hoodie, an item described as key to the suspect's identification, was found in Michael's possession at the time of his arrest. When pressed further, the officer revealed that no search had been conducted in the surrounding area to locate the hoodie, leaving a glaring hole in the chain of evidence. Instead, Michael had been detained solely based on a vague description provided by the store clerk, who had admitted earlier under cross-examination that they couldn't clearly see the suspect's face due to the hood and poor lighting. This combination of shaky evidence and investigative oversights began to sow seeds of doubt in the courtroom. The jury exchanged uneasy glances as the defense dismantled the prosecution's narrative piece by piece. Lisa seized the moment, arguing that the lack of a thorough investigation and the over-reliance on questionable evidence were indicative of a rushed judgment. Judge Caroline Bennett observed the proceedings with an intense focus, her professional demeanor concealing her inner turmoil. She couldn't help but notice how much the cracks in the prosecution's case mirrored the systemic issues she had seen throughout her career. The justice system was supposed to be impartial, yet it often failed to provide fairness, especially to people like Michael. As the forensic experts stepped down and the defense rested their case for the day, Caroline saw a shift in the room's atmosphere. What once felt like a straightforward trial had become a complex puzzle, one where the lines between guilt and innocence were increasingly blurred. The weight of these revelations hung heavily in the air. Michael sat at the defense table, his posture slightly straighter than before, as if the glimmer of hope from the day's proceedings had given him new strength. But for Caroline, the mounting doubt was a reminder of the stakes. This trial wasn't just about determining guilt or innocence. It was about exposing the truth in a system that sometimes seemed designed to obscure it. For Michael, the outcome of this case would determine not just his freedom, but his chance to reclaim a life that had been marred by assumptions and prejudices. When Michael Carter took the stand, the courtroom fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone present. Shackled as he walked to the witness stand, his demeanor was steady but subdued. He began his testimony with raw honesty, acknowledging his past mistakes. "I'm not a perfect man," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "I've made choices I'm not proud of, and I've paid for those choices. But I didn't do this." Michael's words carried a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. He described the night of the alleged robbery, reiterating his claim that he was simply walking home from a friend's house when he was stopped and arrested. His voice cracked slightly as he recounted the moment the police apprehended him, their minds seemingly made up before he had a chance to explain. "They didn't ask me questions, they didn't want to hear my side. They just decided I fit the description." As he spoke, Michael's testimony shifted from a defense of his actions to a broader plea for understanding. "I've spent my whole life being judged, not for what I've done, but for what people assume about me. It's exhausting, fighting every day to prove I'm more than their assumptions, but I'm here now, and I just want the truth to matter." His words hung in the air, resonating deeply with those in the room. Judge Caroline Bennett watched him intently, her composure masking the turmoil within. The jury, too, seemed moved, their faces a mix of doubt, empathy, and reflection. For a brief moment, Michael wasn't just a defendant on trial, he was a man laying bare the toll of a lifetime spent battling prejudice. The closing arguments marked a defining moment in Michael Carter's trial, as the prosecution and defense painted starkly different pictures of the case. The prosecutor, confident in his approach, urged the jury to trust the circumstantial evidence presented. He emphasized the surveillance footage and the witness testimony, claiming that, while not perfect, the pieces came together to form a clear narrative of guilt. "This is a case about accountability," he declared, portraying Michael as a man with a history of bad decisions who had finally been caught in the act. In sharp contrast, defense attorney Lisa Porter delivered an impassioned plea for the jury to look beyond the surface. She highlighted the inconsistencies and gaps in the prosecution's case. The grainy video, the unreliable witness, and the lack of any physical evidence tying Michael to the crime. This trial isn't just about what was presented, she argued. It's about what's missing. Justice demands more than assumptions. The courtroom sat in tense silence as the jury began their deliberations. Hours passed, the weight of the decision hanging over everyone present. Michael remained composed, though his hands were tightly clasped in front of him, his fate beyond his control. Finally, the jury returned, and the foreperson announced the verdict: not guilty. The room erupted in a mix of gasps, murmurs, and quiet cheers. Michael's shoulders sagged with relief, though his face remained unreadable. For Judge Caroline Bennett, the moment was bittersweet. The system had worked as intended, but the trial had exposed deeper truths about prejudice and justice, leaving her with much to reflect upon as the gavel fell and the case came to a close. After the courtroom emptied, Michael Carter approached Judge Caroline Bennett, his expression a mix of curiosity and restrained hurt. Standing a few feet from the bench, he hesitated before speaking. "You knew me," he said quietly, the weight of the trial still evident in his voice. "Why didn't you say anything? You could have at least acknowledged it." Caroline's throat tightened, her years of judicial training battling against the emotions flooding her mind. "I couldn't," she replied softly, her voice steady but tinged with regret. "As a judge, I had to stay impartial. If I'd said anything, it could have jeopardized the case, your case." Michael studied her, his face unreadable, before letting out a sigh. "Impartial," he repeated, shaking his head slightly. "That's the thing, Caroline. The world's never been impartial, not for people like me." His words struck her deeply, the truth of them undeniable. "You're right," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I wish I'd done more back then and now. I'm sorry, Michael." For a moment they stood in silence, the years of separation and unspoken pain stretching between them. Then, with a faint nod, Michael turned and walked away, leaving Caroline alone with the heavy realization that justice, while served, wasn't always enough. As the courtroom emptied and the echoes of the trial faded, Judge Caroline Bennett sat alone at the bench, her fingers tracing the edge of her gavel. The weight of what had just transpired pressed heavily on her. Michael Carter's trial had been more than a case. It had been a reckoning. Through his story, she saw the cracks in the justice system, the prejudice, the rushed assumptions, and the struggles faced by people like Michael, who had to fight for fairness at every turn. For Caroline, the trial became a turning point. It forced her to confront not just the system's failings, but her own role within it. She had spent years believing that the law, when applied correctly, could deliver justice. But now she realized that justice required more than simply following the rules. It demanded empathy, understanding, and a willingness to challenge the system when it fell short. As she left the courtroom that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows on the courthouse steps, Caroline made a silent vow. She couldn't change the past, but she would dedicate herself to ensuring that the future offered more than hollow promises of fairness. It was the least she could do, for Michael, for others like him, and for the ideals she had once believed in.